Welcome back to another Explainer. Today, we're tracking the ultimate journey of energy, all the way from literal sunbeams down to massive biomes. I mean, energy is absolutely the fundamental currency fueling all life on Earth. Without it, ecosystems collapse, and life as we know it just ceases to exist. We're going to trace this whole fascinating trip from the exact moment energy hits our planet, right up to how it builds these incredibly complex biological worlds.
But right off the bat, we've got this massive, mind-boggling paradox. We all know our energy comes from the sun, right? The Earth is constantly bombarded with just immense solar radiation. Yet, green plants, algae, certain bacteria, the organisms actually capturing this energy, they use less than 0.1% of it to photosynthesize. Seriously, think about that. So much of the sun's energy is just absorbed or reflected right back into space by our atmosphere and clouds.
Section 1. Where our energy begins.
Photosynthesis is practically magic. It perfectly illustrates the power of producers, or autotrophs, basically organisms that make their own food. Through this process, they grab sunlight, water, and carbon dioxide out of the thin air, and they literally transform light energy into chemical energy, specifically energy-rich carbohydrates, like glucose. And this is absolutely crucial to the whole biosphere for a few big reasons. First, it provides the baseline energy for nearly all ecosystems. Second, through carbon fixation, it takes carbon from CO2 and turns it into the sugars that physically build organic life. And third, it pumps out molecular oxygen. Without this, we'd have absolutely no oxygen to breathe and no ozone layer to shield us from UV radiation.
Section 2. The Web of Life.
Now, every other living thing in an ecosystem is a consumer. Scientists call them heterotrophs, which literally translates to other feeders. Since they can't produce their own nutrients, they've got to, steal that captured solar energy by eating others. This whole chain starts with primary consumers, the herbivores. Picture a cow munching directly on green plants. Then, you've got secondary consumers, your carnivores, that eat the herbivores. And of course, omnivores, like us humans, playing both sides and feeding on plants and animals.
But energy flow doesn't just halt at the top predator. There's this absolutely critical, often overlooked group, the decomposers. We're mainly talking about specialized bacteria and fungi here. Now, they're consumers too, but their specific job is to unlock nutrients from the dead bodies of plants and animals. They release all that good stuff back into the soil, water, and air so the producers can actually reuse it.
Working right alongside those decomposers are the detritivores, or detritus feeders. Unlike fungi that break things down chemically, these guys feed directly on waste or dead bodies, basically the debris of the ecosystem. This can be anything from tiny little earthworms in the soil up to huge scavengers like vultures. They are literally nature's cleanup crew, making sure absolutely no captured energy or physical nutrient goes to waste.
You know, we usually picture this as a pretty simple, straight line, a food chain. Grass to grasshopper to frog to snake to hawk, right? But in reality, natural ecosystems are way messier. Consumers usually feed on more than just one type of organism. Because of that, ecosystems actually weave together into this complex, interconnected network called a food web. It's a much more accurate way to look at energy flow because it shows the true, overlapping relationships between different feeding levels.
Section 3. The 10% Rule.
Okay, so here is the absolute most important number to remember: 10%. Transferring energy through food webs is, frankly, terribly inefficient. Every single time an organism gets eaten, the usable chemical energy that actually gets transferred as biomass to the next feeding level is only about 10%. We call this ecological efficiency. So, you're probably wondering, where does the other 90% go? Well, it's used up by the organism just doing biological work, and eventually it degrades and gets lost to the environment as low-quality heat. Energy flows one way. Once it turns into heat, it's gone for good.
Let's break down the actual math of this energy pyramid, because it's fascinating. Say your producers, that very first level, capture 50,000 calories of energy. The herbivores, they only get 5,000 calories of that. The carnivores that eat those herbivores get just 500 calories. And the tertiary consumers, the top predators, they are left with a measly 50 calories. This massive, compounding loss of energy beautifully explains a fundamental rule of nature. It's exactly why you rarely ever see more than 4 or 5 levels in a food web. There simply isn't enough energy left over to support another link in the chain.
And listen, this has huge direct implications for us. These energy flow pyramids perfectly explain why the Earth can support significantly more humans if we eat at lower trophic levels. By eating grains, veggies, and fruits directly, we're acting as primary consumers. We tap into that much larger pool of 5,000 calories. But if we pass those exact same crops through cattle and then eat the beef, we're acting as secondary consumers. That means we're tapping into a dramatically smaller, heavily taxed pool of energy.
Section 4. Life without the sun.
For the longest time, science pretty much assumed all energy entered ecosystems through sunlight and photosynthesis. But then, deep at the bottom of the ocean, down where freezing seawater meets boiling magma at hydrothermal vents, we found something crazy. There is absolutely zero sunlight down there. None. Yet these dark, superheated, smoky environments are just packed with unique life. So how is that even possible?
The answer is chemosynthesis. Down in these extreme environments, highly specialized bacteria and archaea step up to act as the producers. But instead of catching rays of sunlight, they actually turn carbon dioxide and water into carbohydrates using energy pulled from inorganic chemical reactions. They use stuff like hydrogen sulfide, molecular hydrogen, or methane that's literally bubbling up from the Earth's crust to make their own food. They build an entire food web that is 100% disconnected from the sun above.
Let's actually put these two side by side to really nail this down. Phototrophs use sunlight, they need pigments like chlorophyll to catch that light, and they release oxygen as a byproduct. Chemotrophs, on the flip side, use chemical energy stored in inorganic chemicals. Since there's no light, they don't need, and don't have, any pigments. And instead of oxygen, they usually release sulfur compounds. It is a completely parallel, almost alien foundation for an ecosystem.
Section 5. Building ecosystems from scratch. So let's zoom out and see how all this energy builds up over time through a process called primary succession. This is the incredibly slow establishment of biotic communities in totally lifeless areas with zero soil. Picture an entirely barren wasteland, like a place where a retreating glacier just scraped the earth down to bare rock, or where a massive volcano erupted and left nothing but hardened, cooled lava. No soil, no organic material, just a literal ecological blank slate.
Kickstarting life in a place like that is painfully slow. We're talking hundreds of years. It begins when the wind, or maybe a passing animal, drops some pioneer species, like lichens and mosses, onto the bare rock. And these little pioneers, they do all the heavy lifting. They trap dust from the wind, they add their own dead matter to the surface, and they actually secrete mild acids that slowly eat away and fragment the solid rock. Over generations, they literally manufacture a thin layer of soil out of nothing. Once that soil can actually hold moisture, mid-successional plants like grasses and shrubs move in. They grow, they die, they add more rich organic matter, which paves the way for sun-loving trees, which are eventually replaced by larger shade-tolerant trees.
Eventually, this centuries-long process reaches what we call a climax community. This is the grand finale of ecological succession. The populations are nicely balanced, the ecosystem is incredibly stable, and energy is just flowing efficiently through a super complex food web. When a climax community gets big enough and well-defined enough, it becomes what we all recognize as a major biome, like a sprawling tundra, a vast grassy plain, or a towering tropical rainforest. So from capturing a tiny fraction of a sunbeam to building a massive rainforest, the journey of energy really is the ultimate driver of life on Earth. But before we wrap up this explainer, I've got a question I want you to seriously ponder. Considering that brutal 10% rule and the massive energy tax between feeding levels, what does your personal ecological footprint look like? Seriously, when you sit down for your next meal, which trophic levels are you relying on? Think about it. Keep learning, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.